I'm your host, not for possession, Narcissa Deville, and welcome to hell. So here's the thing. It's been about a month and a half since Good Omens ended, and I've spent that entire time trying to figure out how to explain how I feel about this show. Not since Queer as Folk has a show completely rendered me so excited and so frustrated in equal measure. On the one hand, I can respect Neil Gaiman's decision not to stray too far from a book that he wrote with his best friend who's no longer here. Look, that sort of loyalty is something to be admired, especially in an industry like Hollywood where pure ambition runs so rampant it would even make a Slytherin like me blush. Loyalty like that is arguably a luxury that few can afford in television or film.
On the other hand, this is a show in which an obvious love story between two male characters exists, but that we ultimately don't get to see explicitly as we do the straight characters, which makes it feel, dare I say, vaguely akin to queerbaiting. I think it doesn't help that, as I've said in many other videos, representation matters for the LGBTQIA community because it's something we're so starved for, especially explicit representation. If you can show two straight people expressing their love and having sex, however campy that might be, why doesn't your queer couple deserve the same treatment? This isn't to say I hold anything against Mr. Gaiman, nor do I think that this is intentional. I don't think the show is queerbaiting us. He seems to be pretty clear that this is meant to be read as a love story, but if you subscribe to the death of the author theory, as Neil Gaiman himself seems to, then it begs the question, does anything not explicitly stated in the text actually matter?
To be fair, I don't really own the script book of this series as yet, so I can't really determine how it reads in that way. And admittedly, it's been quite some time since I read the actual book, so take it with a grain of salt. But I will say I feel like the show does come off on screen as a romance, if an inexplicit one. Ultimately, the question I've had to ask myself is, were this any other author, would I really be so torn? Because I've followed Neil Gaiman on Tumblr for quite some time now, and honestly, I feel like he's just a really nice guy. He's super kind to his fans, and he's one of the few big-name authors who's really supportive of fan fiction and letting readers have their own theories. And I feel like that part is kind of making me conflicted, because I don't want it to seem like I'm trying to attack him or Sir Terry Pratchett, the other half of the writing duo for this series. But think about it this way. If it were J.K. Rowling, would I still be so lenient? To be honest, were it anyone else or any other show, I think I'd be pretty firm in my belief that it isn't exactly fair that the straight characters have relationships that are very explicit, but the two characters that are implied as gay are never actually explicitly seen declaring their love.
It's obvious in every sense what it is, but it's just subtle enough to be frustrating. I have been so long now wanting queer characters that were just themselves and that their queerness was secondary, and I feel like this almost hits that mark, because in any other world they would just be obviously queer characters, obviously in love, and that would be that.
If anything, I hope this video goes to show that sometimes I don't have all the answers, and honestly, I don't even know how I feel about some shows. I know that I love it, and actually, all things considered, it's a pretty queer show.
From non-binary angels and demons and horse persons to the obvious love in the eyes of the angel and demon. And I love that. And maybe you could say that you have to read between the lines to see the gay. I think it's pretty obvious even if you aren't looking for it. And if nothing else, it's a step in a better direction. Far better than other shows. And in a way, between the music, longing looks, love languages far beyond words, perhaps it is more blatant than I'm giving it credit for. One thing that can and needs to be said is that ultimately subtext is pretty common throughout media. And while I may want to say that in this day and age, subtext in otherwise queer media is bad because this should be more explicit, I think there's something to be said for diving deeper than what's on the surface. After all, that is what this channel is largely about. I feel like this video would be a lot easier to make if it weren't for the fact that Good Omens is a miniseries. Because if it were intended to be a longer running show, like say Killing Eve, I wouldn't even have a problem with the quietness of it. The whole will they won't they is a romantic trope of sitcoms, which this kind of is. It's fairly well trodden, and it's actually cute in terms of even this particular story. It's been 6,000 years, making it the world's slowest burn of a romance, and the whole will they or won't they get together after all that time is kind of more hilarious because it's just so dramatic. But with the idea that this is it, that a 6-episode miniseries is perhaps all we're ever going to see of this couple, it becomes that much more frustrating that we never see anything concrete. Yes, Crowley invites Aziraphale to live with him multiple times. Yes, there are obvious multiple heart-wrenching breakup scenes. Yes, Aziraphale has obvious love hidden in his eyes in multiple scenes. But there's never an explicit "I love you." There's never an explicit "we're dating." Other people make the assumption of them, and neither Crowley nor Aziraphale actually correct the assumption. But ultimately, they never actually admit it either. At least, not explicitly.
Sorry to break up an intimate moment. Can I help you?
So why then do I love this show? Why do so many people love this show? Especially queer people who would love to see that more explicit. I think what it comes down to is that in a lot of ways, while things might feel subtextual, they're also very hard to miss. The way that it's filmed between words and actions and looks and even the score itself presents itself as exactly what the story is. I'm by no means a film expert, but I do know, as I think most of us do on some subconscious level, that film and television as a medium are multi-layered. How something is shot, the angles at which things are filmed, mixed with music, all create an emotion within the viewer that, even if it's never explicitly stated, you know what's going on. When you show a scene like this, in which one character looks longingly at another, beaming because of an otherwise simple act of kindness, which just shows how much character B knows character A and how important something is to them, along with the romantic music, you create a scene which is very obviously meant to be a romantic one, juxtaposed against the literal destruction that has happened all around them. Then there's the paintball scene. It's subtle, and yet, Aziraphale complaining that while he could miracle away the stain, he would always know it was there, and then convincing Crowley to do it instead with a simple look, again juxtaposed with its destruction going on all around them, is kind of blatantly romantic, if comic. Then there's one of the most blatant scenes in the entire series, in which, facing certain death at the hands of Lucifer himself, Aziraphale threatens Crowley, not with a sword, but with the threat of never speaking to him again. The silent treatment is ultimately the thing that convinces Crowley to stop time itself in order to think of a plan. And if that isn't marriage, I don't know what is. There are many other instances. Crowley slamming Aziraphale against a wall, the angel Uriel telling Aziraphale his boyfriend in the dark glasses won't get him any special treatment, and ultimately, perhaps the most telling, the final scene. While the dialogue isn't inherently explicit in Confessions of Love, it is a romantic scene. Two characters dining at the Ritz amongst other couples, while a clear love song plays in the background, with lyrics such as, "The streets of town were paved with stars, it was such a romantic affair, and as we kissed and said goodnight, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square." Sometimes love isn't always shouting "I love you" at someone. Sometimes I love you is cleaning your partner's favorite jacket. Sometimes I love you is saving books from an explosion because you know how much your partner loves them. And sometimes I love you is worrying about another person's safety. Sometimes I love you begins with a simple act of kindness. After 6,000 years with the same person, maybe I love you doesn't need to be something said so explicitly, because you know you love each other. By then, I love you isn't so much a statement, it's an action. It's the way in which you do things for another person.
Sometimes an unspoken I love you that exists purely in actions alone, speaks louder than any words ever could.
Ultimately, that's the power of this show. Maybe it isn't as explicit as some of us would like, and maybe that's frustrating, but maybe, just maybe, it's also okay. Because ultimately, it's still a great show. And whether or not it's ever going to see a second season, God herself willing, maybe we'll get to see something just a touch more explicit.
I'd like to take a moment to thank Mr. Gaiman for all the sacrifices that he made, time he spent away from his family to make this show possible. Whatever else I might have to say about some of the more quiet elements of the show's queerness, I think ultimately it was done with the best of intentions, and I still love it.
I really struggled with how to talk about this show because ultimately I do really love it. Whatever else can be said about explicitly gay characters and all of that, something about this show really just makes me happy. Sometimes I like to rewatch it just because of how much I enjoy it. In particular, I liked the opening from episode 3 in which we get to see Crowley and Aziraphale throughout the centuries. There's something about it that's both comic and beautiful, and really, if you haven't watched this series, I hope that I haven't scared you away from it, and I hope that you will come to enjoy it anyway.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give me a like, comment down below, and keep the conversation going, and subscribe to my channel. And if you would like to see further videos like this, and just support me in general, please feel free to give to my Ko-Fi/Patreon. All the links will be in the description box below. Bye!